The Avoda service begins on page 326. We read in the English. Introduction. The world of God is great and holy. Of all the lands of the world, the land of Israel was set aside to be holy for us. And in the land of Israel, the holiest city is Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the holiest place was the holy temple, and the holiest site in the temple was the Holy of Holies. Our tradition is that in the world there are 70 nations, and of them Israel was set aside to be holy unto God. The holiest of the people Israel is the tribe of the Levites. The holiest of the Levites are the priests, and among the priests the holiest was the high priest. The lunar year had 354 days. Some days are set aside as holy days. Holier than the festivals are the Shabbatot, and the holiest of the Shabbatot is the Day of Atonement, the Shabbat of Shabbatot. There are 70 languages in the world, and of them, Hebrew was chosen as our holy tongue. The holiest of all things written in the Hebrew language is the Holy Torah. In the Torah, the holiest part is the 10 Commandments, and the holiest of all the words in the 10 Commandments is the name of God. From the creation of the world to the sanctuary in the desert, page 327. I would speak of God's greatness, the one who is my strength, the single one, joined by no other. None takes precedence on earth or in the heavens, nor is there a past or future beyond God. Master of thought, divine indeed, God contemplates and nothing is left out. God commands and nothing constrains. Thought is deed, speech and act are one. God supports the world in strength and bears its suffering. The song of all that is created rises up to God, who receives the praise of those on high and below. This is the one God, holy in heaven, present on earth, to whom oceans sound praise. The deep pays tribute, galaxies extol. Each day speaks and nights chant. Fire pronounces God's name, and forests sing, and animals teach the might of God's wonders. Page 328. 3 people were chosen to see the face of the sovereign, to serve, to sing, to enter the inner chambers. Like the most beautiful vine with attractive leaves and gorgeous fruit, Amram, rooted in the tribe of Levi, grew 3 beautiful branches, a priest, a shepherd, and a prophetess. When the time of ripening came, these flowered and were able to break the chains of Egypt and breach the walls of the sea. The first was covered by a cloud, purified for a week, and then stood between when the word was delivered. The mighty bent before him. Everyone had to yield in awe. He nourished the holy flock in the desert with bread from heaven until they arrived in the land. The girl with the timbrel dug a well for the people, and when she died, there was no water to drink. The beloved people were favored with clouds of glory because of the priest who served righteously, making peace. A faithful promise was given to him and his descendants that the eternal covenant of this sacred service never end. While they sat at the entrance to the tent, the lawgiver taught the priests the order of the service, for it was prescribed for him to do so, how to wash, how to anoint, to sanctify themselves hand and foot, to wear white linen, and to tie the sash. He then ordained them after 7 days, legislating the same for future generations. As it is written in your Torah, as was done on this day to atone for you, God has commanded to do henceforth. When the priests gathered at midnight of Yom Kippur, they drew lots for the privilege of sweeping the altar, so that none might push ahead. Then they chose yet another to appoint those who would sweep clean the outer altar and wipe the inner sanctum's candelabrum. None could exchange places. The priestly officer called out, "May the priests who were chosen through the secret lot for the privilege of lighting the incense and the removal of the innards before the sacrifice is brought to the altar come forward, and may none change places." Finally, the assistant would ask, "Has the dawn broken so that we may slaughter the morning sacrifice, not in the dark?" Then the high priest was surrounded by his acolytes, who stood outside the pool with a curtain between so that they could not gaze upon him. He bared his flesh, immersed himself, and then put on the 8 priestly garments, for he had prepared himself in conformity with the unchanging law. Appropriately and unerringly, he slaughtered the sheep, spilled its blood, offered the incense, lit the lamp, arranged the sacrifice on the altar, and poured the libation. For the first confession, he then once again came out to the porch to sanctify and immerse himself, this time putting on the white linen vestments, not the gold ones. He stretched his hands over the bull and confessed his sins and those of his household, withholding nothing in embarrassment. Page 330. And thus he would say, Ana Hashem chatati aviti pashati lefanecha ani uveiti ana vashem kapena lachataim velavonot velifshaim shechatati ושאביתי ושפשעתי לפניך אני וביתי. ככתוב בתורת משה עבדך כי ביום הזה יכפר עליכם לטהר אתכם מכל חטאותיכם לפני אדוני. והכהנים והעם העומדים בעזרה כשהיו שומעים את השם הנכבד והנורא מפורש יוצא מפי כהן גדול בקדושה ובתורה. היו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים ונופלים על פניהם. When the priests and all the people standing in the temple court would hear the glorious and awe-inspiring name explicitly enunciated in holiness and purity by the lips of the high priest, they would bow and kneel and fall prostrate to the ground, saying, "Praised is the name of the one whose glorious sovereignty will be forever and ever."
Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
The high priest would intentionally prolong the utterance of the name while the people recited their praise, whereupon he would complete the verse, saying, Titaru, you shall be cleansed. And you, out of your goodness, aroused your love and forgave the one who was faithful to you. The second confession. He walked to the east of the courtyard where 2 goats, alike in form and size, stood ready as the sacrificial offering for the consequences of sin. He grabbed the gold lots, pulled them from the urn, and cast them for heaven and for the wilderness. He called out for the one, a purification offering unto Adonai. Those who heard him responded by praising God's name. On the head of the goat that was to be sent out, he tied a crimson thread, directing the goat towards its destination. He returned to the sacrificial bull, confessing the sin of his tribe before the rock of Israel. And thus he would say, Ana Hashem, Chatati, Aviti, Pashati lefanecha, Ani uveiti, Uvnei Aharon, Am Kedoshecha, Ana Vashem, Kapena, La Chataim, Vela Avonot, Veliv Shaim, Shechatati, Veshe'aviti, Veshepashati lefanecha, Ani uveiti, Uvnei Aharon, Am Kedoshecha, Kakatuv betorat Moshe avdecha, Ki vayom hazeh yechaper aleichem, letaher etchem mikol chatoteichem, lifnei Adonai. V'hakol hanim, v'ha'am ha'omdim ba'azara, כשהיו שומעים את השם הנכבד והנורא, מפורש יוצא מפי כהן גדול בקדושה ובתורה. היו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים ונופלים על פניהם. When the priests and all the people standing in the temple court would hear the glorious and awe-inspiring name explicitly enunciated in holiness and purity by the lips of the high priest, they would bow and kneel and fall prostrate to the ground, saying,
Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
The high priest would intentionally prolong the utterance of the name while the people recited their praise, whereupon he would complete the verse, saying,
Titaru.
Thus you shall be cleansed. And you, out of your goodness, aroused your love and forgave the tribe who serve you. The sprinkling of blood. He then took a sharp knife, ritually slaughtered the sacrifice, receiving the blood in its bowl, which he handed to his assistant. The sound of his footsteps was heard from between the curtains as he placed the incense within, allowing the smoke to rise, and then he exited. He took the swirled blood from his young assistant, returned to the hall, and stood between the two curtain rods. Dipping his finger, he sprinkled the designated number of times, upward 1 and downward 7. And thus he would count.
אחת, אחת ואחת, אחת ושתיים, אחת ושלוש, אחת וארבע, אחת וחמש, אחת ושש, אחת ושבע.
He quickly returned, placed the bowl on its pedestal, and slaughtered the goat. He offered it up and received its blood in a holy vessel. He then walked back again and stood in the presence of the ark and sprinkled the blood as before. And thus he would count.
אחת, אחת ואחת, אחת ושתיים, אחת ושלוש, אחת וארבע, אחת וחמש, אחת ושש, אחת ושבע.
He bestirred himself and placed the bowl aside, now picking up the blood of the bull. He rushed and went out, standing in the front of the embroidered curtain, and sprinkled the blood as he had done on the ark cover. He hurried to repeat the procedure, sprinkling the blood of the goat. The third confession. Mixing the two together, he purified the altar of gold 7 times to purify it, then 4 on each corner. He hurried to the live goat, confessing before God the mistakes and transgressions of the people. And thus he would say,
Ana Hashem chatu avu pash'u lefanecha amecha Beit Yisrael. Ana v'shem kapena lachatayim vela'avonot velifsha'im shechat'u ושאבו ושפשעו לפניך עמך בית ישראל. ככתוב בתורת משה עבדך כי ביום הזה יכפר עליכם לטהר אתכם מכל חטאותיכם לפני אדוני. והכהנים והעם העומדים בזרה כשהיו שומעים את השם הנכבד והנורא מפורש יוצא מפי כהן גדול בקדושה ובתורה. היו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים ונופלים על פניהם.
When the priests and all the people standing in the temple court would hear the glorious and awe-inspiring name explicitly enunciated in holiness and purity by the lips of the high priest, they would bow and kneel and fall prostrate to the ground, saying, "Praised is the name of the one whose glorious sovereignty will be forever and ever."
Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto le'olam va'ed.
The high priest would intentionally prolong the utterance of the name while the people recited their praise, whereupon he would complete the verse, saying,
Titaru.
Thus you shall be cleansed. And you, out of your goodness, aroused your love and forgave the congregation of Jeshurun.